So I want to take you back to 1961. At the time, there was a heated race going on between Russia and the United States of America to see not only who could put someone into space, but to see who could put a man on the surface of the moon. Now, this was something that the president at the time, John F. Kennedy, was determined to achieve. He used to visit NASA headquarters frequently, and on one of his trips there, he was walking down the corridor when he bumped into a janitor. The president introduced himself and asked the janitor, "What do you do here?" To which the janitor replied, "Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon." So rather than feeling like his job was just to clean the halls, NASA had clearly made sure that everyone from the astronauts going into space all the way down to the janitors cleaning the hallways completely understood their vision to get to the moon and the part that each individual had to play in achieving that objective. And of course, as we all know, Apollo 11 touched down on the surface of the moon on July 20th, 1969. And when Neil Armstrong hopped out of the capsule, NASA and the USA had achieved their long-standing goal. So establishing purpose is just one of the many ways that we can develop a culture in our businesses that gets the best out of our people and therefore delivers the results we want to achieve. And in this talk, we're going to cover a number of ways to do this. Now, the title of my talk, Why Your Culture is More Important Than Your SEO, was largely inspired by this quote from legendary business strategist and philosopher Peter Drucker, who argues simply that culture eats strategy for breakfast. His argument being that if you don't have the right culture in your organization, then even the best, most well-formed strategy isn't going to have the impact that it should. Daniel Coyle, in his book, The Culture Code, backs this up, giving a very impactful statistic. He quotes that group culture is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. A strong culture increases net income 765% over 10 years, according to a Harvard study of more than 200 companies. It would be very difficult to achieve this purely from strategy or good products or service alone. The thing is that anyone can copy your strategy, but nobody can copy your culture. Your culture is one of those unique traits that can give you an advantage over your competitors. You can employ the brightest minds, the most talented people in the industry, but without providing them the right environment, you cannot just expect your stars to perform. If we consider three pillars that every business needs, the strategy, its capabilities within its people, and the culture, it's important that all three of these are working together in tandem. Yet there tends to be one of these which gets forgotten about more often than the others. Of course, that's the culture. Yet today I'm going to argue that if you get your culture right before you worry about your work, service, or product, you're more likely to achieve the results that you want. So before we look at what culture is, let's first take a look at what it isn't. So it's not the fact that you have a foosball or ping pong or pool table within your office, or that you offer free tea or coffee, or buy pizza for your team every Friday lunchtime. It's not even the fact that you look after your staff by giving them private healthcare or other monetary perks. In fact, a study conducted by Slack found that high-performing teams respond less to perks than to a workplace that offers them the best tools to work with, meaningful connections, a culture of collaboration, and leaders who are transparent and value teamwork. And we'll go into motivation in a bit more detail later on, but this suggests that it's the environment, not the financial rewards, that really create a high-performing culture. Culture also isn't just about having fun or working hard, playing hard. And most importantly, it's not an excuse to avoid accountability or get away with poor performance. And I think this is a critical point to emphasize, because I think a lot of people think that culture is the fluffier side of business operations, when actually there's a fine balance to be made. It's about finding that sweet spot between having a high-performing team along with an environment that's caring, has empathy, where there's a sense of psychological safety. Ultimately, I believe that culture is underpinned by the values you have as a company. Values are the unwritten behaviors that define your organization. They're everything below the surface, the things that cannot be seen, that define the way your people go about their everyday work. And one of the most important things to emphasize about values is that they absolutely cannot be forced onto people. In fact, if a leadership team tries to force values onto a wider organization, it's likely that they will fail to take hold. The thing is, values actually already exist in your team, especially when you get to a certain size. You just need to know where to look for them. If defining values are of interest to you, I would highly recommend picking up a copy of Lost and Founder by Rand Fishkin. In the book, he talks about the processes that they went through at Moz, which ended up helping them develop their core set of values known as TAGFI, which stands for transparency, authenticity, generosity, fun, empathy, and exceptionalism. And this is something that we ended up doing at Blue Array about 2.5 years ago now, when we were around 20 people. We're at 40 people now. And at the time, we'd recently moved into our new office in Reading, and we wanted to establish our values before we grew any bigger. So this meant getting everyone into a room to undertake a few exercises. The first being a short brainstorm on Post-it notes, jotting down as many words as possible over the course of 5 minutes around what they felt the company stands for, what it deems important, and what makes it unique. And in the second brainstorm, again, a few minutes, Post-it notes, writing down as many words listing the traits they like in others and the characteristics in others that they would like to adopt themselves. We then got everyone to group all of the similar words together by sticking the Post-its up on the wall, seeing which words were being used most frequently, upon which it became clear what our values were. But just to emphasize again, this has to be a group exercise in order for everyone to feel like they have ownership of the values and for them to be taken seriously. And once you've established these values, you then need to demonstrate them and to make them part of everything you do, from the interactions you have internally and externally, to your recruitment approach, to your progression and promotion policies. And to make sure that your values don't just become posters on the walls gathering dust, they should be demonstrated by everyone and celebrated when they are. So, for example, giving kudos to each other for acting in a way that aligns with one of your values, and building your routes to progression and your career objectives alongside your values to show that it's not just the knowledge side of things that will help you move forward, but also the way you're aligning with the desired behaviours of the business too. At the end of this presentation, I'll share the values that we came up with as an agency. Okay, so hopefully that gives a bit of background. So I'm now going to talk about what makes a good culture. So what's the answer? Well, like anything, and just like SEO, there's no right or wrong answer. And with culture, it also depends. It depends on the people you have in the business, on what you want to achieve, your leaders, and the long-term vision. But what I can hopefully do is go into 4 things which I feel help to develop a good culture, and these being psychological safety, intrinsic motivation, values-based recruitment, and encouraging a healthy work-life balance. So let's start with psychological safety. This is a term that was first used by Harvard leadership professor Amy Edmondson in her book, The Fearless Organization. She summed up the idea nicely early on by stating that fear is the enemy of flourishing. Later went on to explain that psychological safety is a climate in which people are comfortable expressing and being themselves. So it's an innate human need to avoid the possibility of stepping out of line or being a non-conformist. And this is why in some organizations you have people who are afraid of being judged and worry about looking stupid in front of their boss or colleagues, or won't speak up when they have something that they really want to say, or where they could add value to a company. The thing is, these are all really great things, but if people are afraid to speak, then it's likely that the best ideas will be missed and the organization will never move forward and reach its potential. In 2017, a poll run by Gallup found that only 3 in 10 employees in the US strongly agreed with the statement, "My opinions count at work," which is pretty shocking in the modern day. I mean, we're now in times where employee knowledge provides such a competitive advantage, and it's often those on the ground that have ideas that can really make a difference. In fact, this is so important that in 2015, Google's people operations team ran a survey to learn what its employees felt made the highest performing teams, and the number 1 factor was unanimously psychological safety. So this is absolutely a cultural issue. If you want psychological safety to increase in your business, and you want people to feed back and get ideas from them, it's something that ultimately needs to be demonstrated from the top, including your senior management team and your team leaders. And some ways you can go about doing this include showing vulnerability, saying you don't know, or that you're not the best person to help with this, or going and asking for help yourself. Being in a position of seniority doesn't necessarily mean you need to know everything, and being humble will often earn you more respect. Admitting mistakes when you make them. Everyone makes mistakes, even encouraging mistakes if they are made with the right intentions. Ask for feedback from your teams, give them a voice, reward effort, reward those that try hard and do the right things. So the second point is around the way to motivate people, and particularly intrinsic motivation factors. So this is something that Daniel Pink in his book Drive focuses on. He states that intrinsic motivation is engaging in a behavior because it's personally rewarding, not for an external reward. In other words, the job needs to be worth more than just the money that it pays. We have to understand that to motivate the majority of people, there has to be something in it for them. And actually, for most people, money only aids happiness and satisfaction to a point where they feel comfortable with their standard of living. After this, money tends to have very little to no effect. In fact, for many, it can lead to dissatisfaction and a kind of constant feeling of wanting more. So this is why, provided employees are paid a fair wage for their job, there are other motivational factors that are generally more important. And in Drive, Daniel Pink lists 3: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So let's go through all 3 of those. First is autonomy. And in its purest form, autonomy is a basic human desire to have control of your life. Without autonomy, well-being suffers drastically. From a business context, researchers at Cornell University studied 320 small businesses, half of which granted workers autonomy, the other half relying on top-down direction. The businesses that offered autonomy grew at 4 times the rate of the control-oriented firms and had 1/3 the turnover. So in a workplace setting, this means setting expectations and then putting complete trust in people to deliver on these expectations. Now, this is a really interesting topic at the moment, particularly with COVID-19, meaning that many are having to work from home, either full-time or for at least part of the week. And this means that autonomy and treating people like grown-ups is very important, but also the impact on culture needs to be considered. And to anticipate any questions around this, I think it's quite simple. And this quote in the People Management HR magazine sums up my thoughts here quite well. This says that a strong culture will continue to influence workers' behaviours, even if no one is watching. If a company has a strong culture, it will continue to dictate how people work, even if everything happens virtually. Strong cultures explain why you do what you do, even when no one is watching. So it doesn't matter whether you're in close proximity to each other or not. It won't, or it certainly shouldn't, affect your culture if it's already strong. And this is something which is referenced in Jim Collins's classic business book, Good to Great, where he talks about building a culture of discipline. And this doesn't mean that you're keeping people in line, or as he says, being a tyrannical disciplinarian. It's more giving people freedom and responsibility within a framework. In other words, setting the expectations of how your organization does things and tying this back to the values you have established, as we discussed earlier. But also you need to recruit people who are self-disciplined and use your values to bring individuals into the business that already have the right mindset. So the second intrinsic motivator is mastery. So if control leads to compliance, then autonomy leads to engagement. We've already worked out the autonomy part, which is a great start. Then if you achieve engagement, then employees will achieve flow in their work. You can think of flow as a state where your work is so enjoyable that you don't even think of it as work, and when time flies when you're doing it. To achieve this, you need to make sure that whether you manage a person or a team or a department, you're offering them the right sort of challenge in their work. And this point between a task being too easy and too difficult is often referred to as the Goldilocks zone. Too easy and the work is too boring, too difficult and failure occurs, which causes frustration. So it's all about checking in regularly with your team, understanding where they are at in their development and making sure they're finding a good balance in the work that they're doing. Flow then leads to mastery because it's something that you enjoy so much that you want to do more of it and learn everything there is possibly to know about it. And then this leads to greater productivity and satisfaction, which are great things for a business. You can do this by making a culture of continuous self-improvement the norm, encouraging the use of personal development plans for all staff, setting objectives for them, and discussing progress against those objectives every time you meet for a one-to-one. Okay, so the third and probably most important motivator, I think, is purpose. And this very much goes back to the story I gave at the start of the presentation about the janitor from NASA and him understanding the mission of this organization to put a man on the moon. In Drive, Daniel Pink states that the most deeply motivated people, not to mention those who are most productive and satisfied, hitch their desires to a cause larger than themselves. So what does this mean from a business perspective? Mainly it means being open, honest, and providing transparency about company or team targets and the performance against these targets. When setting objectives for teams and individuals, tie these into what matters to the company. So each individual understands the part that they are playing in the organizational objectives. At Blue Array, we've started using the OKR framework, objectives and key results, to set goals across the team, meaning that they can see how their own progress is impacting the goals of the business. Right, so we've been through intrinsic motivation. The next area to achieving a great culture is your recruitment processes. And to me, as I mentioned already, the most important thing to do is adopt a values-led recruitment approach. Think about your desired behaviours and position your screening processes, questioning and interviews, and anything else you do to evaluate candidates based on your values and the team that you want to build. And that's not to say that you should just build a team full of like people. In fact, quite the opposite. I would strongly encourage you to build a team where differences are embraced, both in terms of diversity and inclusion, but also in the personalities in your team. So at Blue Array, for example, we have a real mix of people who work methodically and those who like last minute pressure, or mix of introverts and extroverts. Some are task driven, some are relationship driven. And this is great for us because it means we have different characters, skill sets, ambitions, and therefore a great, well-rounded team. But having differences in your team's personalities doesn't mean that they have different values. And we can quickly see that when someone comes to interview for a role with us, whether they have the behaviours and attitude that we're looking for. While skills are important, they can be easily taught, but skills mean absolutely nothing if you don't have the right attitude to go alongside it. So the final point I wanted to discuss about creating a great culture is around balance and well-being. And this is something that's so important right now, particularly with everything that's going on in the world, the pandemic, some people on furlough, those remaining at work, maybe having to work harder than ever before. So it's crucial that you make it okay to not be all about work. This doesn't mean that we don't want hardworking people, by the way, but it's also important to see and treat people as people with lives outside of work. And this is something which, even before COVID was growing on the agenda, a staggering statistic here, poor mental health costs UK employers £45 billion per year, which, means promoting a healthy work-life balance is a great start, but perhaps also being open to the idea of flexible working practices more generally. Some of the benefits of this, as listed in this CIPD study, showed that, as expected, feelings of good work-life balance, but also a reduction in stress levels, as well as almost a third of respondents saying it would be a factor of them staying with their current employer. So ultimately, a good work-life balance leads to increased engagement, loyalty to the company, and in turn, better productivity, which is only going to help the business in the long run. One thing we try to do at Blu-ray is actually actively look for people that have interests outside of work. So we have a lot of musicians here, for example. And this means that rather than people who are completely obsessed with working all day and night, we have people that value their downtime and will therefore avoid burning out and be more productive for us when they are working. And I truly believe that if you look after your people, good things will happen for you as a business. And that's not just in terms of well-being and mental health, but also covering everything else that we've discussed today. So we're almost at the end, but before I finish, I just wanted to go back to the exercise I mentioned earlier, where at Blue Array, we use the approach taken by Moz to uncover our own company values. So what did we end up with? So our 5 values are focused, collaborative, honest, confident, and supportive. And I'd say they are largely the bedrock of our culture. They help to guide our interactions with each other and our clients. And we celebrate them by having a kudos and employee of the month system where everyone can vote for the person they feel has best demonstrated our values, as well as creating objectives against them to guide our career progression plans. And I'll be honest and say that by no means is our culture perfect. I don't think it's possible to create a perfect culture, but at least it's something we try to focus on and improve. And this could go a long way in making people feel like they are safe here and they're part of something bigger. And hopefully we're doing something right. I mean, this year has been a bit unusual, obviously, but in 2019, our staff turnover on average was less than 4%, which for an agency, I think is pretty impressive. So hopefully now you understand why culture is so important. So I'll leave you with a question to ponder. What does your culture look like? Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the conference.